don't know if I can live up to that expectation. For a moment, I thought, oh my goodness, do I have to give a talk on science? Because I'm not prepared for that right now.
No science talk, because I won't understand it. But no, but the fact you have a PhD in organic chemistry is,
yeah,
very impressive.
So this, I think, is a good remark. So if anyone will say at a certain point, but I cannot write poetry, I'm not a poet, the answer was going to be, me neither. Yeah, me neither. So I think we are all set up now. Before I share a little bit about me and why I got these two worlds mixed and bridged to one another, why don't I read a poem? Because it feels bad to me that we talk about poetry and actually we don't read or write poetry. So why don't I start with that, and then I'll blend in and weave in a little bit of why am
Perfect.
I doing this to myself and to you. So I read a poem from the Poetry of Leadership called Leader. You will never know till you stand up. There is enough space within you, space to contain the multitudes, your multitudes. Stand up, speak up, say no. No to fragmentation, no to moving faster, slow down. Know your multitudes. Learn what moves inside and outside them. Turn towards the truth. Stand up, speak up. The whisper said, I want to talk business in rhyme. I think, I don't know, it's very bad to explain poetry, but I think this really tells a lot about me and how I ended. So I crossed an ocean of two fields that looked very, very separate, the science and the arts, the hard stuff and the soft stuff. At a certain point in my life, I don't even know why, I really it's still to this moment, I really don't know why I did that. I went to a writing retreat. And I didn't want to write a book. It was ages ago. I was in full corporate mode. I had no intention to leave corporate. In the first night on this writing retreat in Montana, beautiful place. I think I went actually for the view and the space. That was the only reason I went there. The host, the retreat leader, asked us to write on a piece of paper, tell us something that nobody knows about you. And I don't know why. I wrote on a piece of paper, I ran a manufacturing plant. I ran a manufacturing plant and I hate it. And I did not realize, really honest, 100%, I did not realize I had written that. But the best part has to come, because at a certain point, she asked us to read it out loud. And I'm horrified, because in that moment, I actually read what I've written on that piece of paper. And I'm like, I cannot read this out loud. And then she calls my name, we are all in circle. And I read this out loud. I run a manufacturing plant and I hate it. And everybody turns. It's like, what? We are writers here. What is she doing here? Do you run a manufacturing plant? And I was like, everybody looked at me like, she's a spy, like, did she lost her way? And I really did not know how to explain, because of course they went on and asking, so do you want to write a book? Are you writing a book? And I wasn't doing any of that. And that sentence did not leave me. It really did not leave me. So I actually ended up on a flight back from that retreat to write an entire book of poetry. It's like that sentence, that piece of paper I still have somewhere. I should have looked for it. And it didn't leave me. It was something, it was within me probably since, I don't know, decades. And I came out, and once you listen or once you see something, you cannot unsee it or unhear it anymore. And it took me a couple of years to actually realize I'd written a book of poetry. I actually had to go back and reread it, then type it down and realize, oh my goodness, I've written a volume of it, and I remained in my corporate career, in my corporate life, feeling that, that fragmentation, that constantly moving faster and faster and faster, and felt something I knew since I was a child. Was this very multifaceted, a polymath child that would actually do medicines and trying to kill everyone. But I was saying, no, I need to cure you. And you're not feeling well, I need to cure you. But actually, they all risk their life. And at the same time, doing these medicines, and I was writing poems even before school told me what poems was. And of course, that was not acceptable because artist is not a job. Any of you who has heard this is like, is art a job? What? It's like, no. And so I actually start forgetting pieces of me. I start forgetting pieces of the multitudes that I was, and convinced myself that I was not an artist, I was not a poet, and I was a scientist, a good scientist, and build a career on that. And then that sentence, those poems, is like, lady, this is it, this is not. And I don't know if any one of you can relate. I got very close to that dream I had for decades, the so-called, how do you call it in the US, the corner office? When you are on those succession plan. And let's also be honest, a woman in science is rare in certain environments. So the visibility was all there, and almost ready to sit on that chair. I told myself one morning going into the office, oh my goodness, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. I have to stand up. I have to say no. This is not who I am, or not all of who I am. Of course, still today, I'm in love with science and with this particular type of business that people think I left behind, but no, they're still part of me. But it wasn't all of me. I was like, stand up, speak up, say no to fragmentation, no to moving faster, slow down, know your multitude. So I embarked on a journey that only later I understood it was first of a journey of self-leadership before I actually could pretend to lead anyone or factories. And that changed the course of my life. It really changed the course of my life. And so I wanted to create something different. I wanted to create a container for me and for others to be all. Not just that little thing that had made me successful or my parents were very proud of, because of course she got a PhD, and my father even said, women don't understand science, why do you want to get a PhD? And I'm like, no, let me prove you wrong. And so they were very proud. I mean, my mother still today, this has been several years now, still, she's a researcher. I mean, Mom, I haven't been a researcher since 2007. It's like, how do you reconcile? But anyway, so I created this container first for myself, and then for anyone who wants to explore what these multitudes are. Also, because I thought, oh my goodness, we have made a myth, a legend of leadership. A legend that has to perform in a certain way, has to look in a certain way. And actually, there is no humanity anymore in that. In that hero leader that has to rescue and save the company, the other people, and say, oh my goodness, this is not possible, it's not even human. So I start, and also because I was pushed by people, but what poetry or art has to do with business? And to me, as they have a lot of things in common. And especially when we talk about humanity and today's, I mean, in our days, it's very common to say human-centered leadership, but if there is no human at the center of that leadership, there is only, you know, a performative doing something. How can business be human-centered? So I start telling my story, I start sharing my points, I start bringing poetry into organization. And of course, everyone always tells me I'm not a poet. And I say exactly what I told you before, me neither. And so it's okay to write poetry and poems that come from our heart and express who we are, what we feel, because even though this is not accepted in corporate, or especially if you are a leader, we like to think that we are rational beings, but actually we feel first and then we think. That's actually our brain works. And so if we don't have a way to familiarize with what we are feeling, and if you don't have a language actually to express it, but only a language to shame it, there isn't any leadership to me, because there is no emotional safety anywhere. And poetry, like arts in general, are the ways, are the outlet to express who we are and how we feel. And there is so much learning that comes from there. When we dedicate a practice, of course, we can use it as a tool, so we can apply the same strategy that has got us in trouble to art or to anything else, to anything, but that's not the intent. When we start practicing it, I find that there is a lot to learn there, and is an act of self-leadership to me. A leadership that wants to bring us back to the unity and the wholeness of who we are. And from that place, then maybe we can help others solve their challenges, which is why we have business in the first place, to help others solve challenges, make others' dream come a reality. But if no one is dreaming, it's like, how can you help someone else dream to be fulfilled? So maybe something to ponder, and I like to play a lot with this word. It's like, what if leadership was actually humanship? What that would look like? If we could express that humanship, how would that look like? How would we change how we lead? What type of businesses would we create? So those are some of the questions I always ask myself and the people who want to work with me. And maybe I'll pause, because I tend to talk a lot.
So Fateme, can you talk about, it's interesting because for me personally, we're surrounded by so much data, so much information, real time, and separating kind of the noise from what really matters. And, your background in science, you would come up with specific solutions. Like there's a definite right answer in organic chemistry. But there aren't a lot of answers. There aren't a lot of simple solutions in the world of business, because you're dealing with people and whatnot. Can you explain the dichotomy? You touched on it a little bit, but just the art and science and the friction in today's world. To be a leader, you really need to be in both camps.
Well, I can tell what it feels to me to be both, because I'm both. My mind thinks, I operate both as a chemist, so someone very analytical, and someone like an artist, so with a certain sensitivity and a certain capacity to express. So I can tell you what it feels to me to be in both camps and try to operate from that place. To me, science and arts have the same purpose. They both look for truth. And specifically, if I take chemistry, that's what I've bathed myself in for several decades, is very similar to writing a poem. It's very similar to painting for me, because it's about taking elements and making them work, making them create something that did not exist before. And of course, we can do chemistry just following a recipe, add A plus B to get whatever, Z. And we can also write a poem in this same way, or we can paint in the same way, color one and use this green or that green, or write in this style. Or we can seek for something. We can seek to understand the world that doesn't exist. And practice, I mean, I remember my years in the lab, and I told you just before, the only thing I remember is those hours in the lab, researching for something that did not exist. I had to use my intuition in many times, many times. I had to be noticing how the molecules were reacting. Like when I write a poem or I paint, I have to notice what's happening within me, what's happening out there, why am I triggered, why my impression or expression is going in that direction. And also creating an environment that is conducive of what is going to happen. As a chemist, I knew that maybe in that condition, that reaction was not happening. But what if I would change pressure? What if I would change temperature? Same if I paint, which condition? Am I applying dry paint? Or what if I add water? What happens if I add water? And what if I add alcohol, or a poem is exactly the same? What if it's not E, but is they? So the condition change, and those are skills that a leader has to master. A leader cannot only be in the analytical and data. Well, we all know that data can be read in many ways, and we lose people when we just tell them the dry data. There is no engagement, no excitement. In which context? And what do we do with that? And how do we explain to you what that means to you? So there is more than just raw data or an assembly line and putting this and that next to one another. That there is, like, ultimately any leader has to deal, especially with people. They're not just, I don't know, a computer, even though in this setting is like, okay, I could even have a robot behind me, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. So I cannot actually separate. I cannot separate within me those things and the way of being, because to me it's a way of being, and I cannot separate it from leadership. How are we going to lead people if we don't understand, well, in the first place, how are we feeling, what's the context, what are the emotions, how to listen, how to notice, how to imagine a new future. I mean, that especially now there is so much talking about the new normal, which will require a lot of leadership, tons of leadership. Well, if we cannot imagine it, and to me, imagination doesn't come from data, from raw data. just that doesn't look like imagining. I don't know. That's what I feel.
I've got a response if I can share. Yeah, this is great. You know what I really like about this is that a lot of times these chats are invigorating for the mind and for thinking, but this is also invigorating for the feeling. So I appreciate you bringing that to the forum. I don't mind telling you all, and some of you have heard this, but I failed as a leader in my third company. I'm currently on my fourth. But I failed as a leader, and it almost bankrupted me because I led with the head. I led with what I thought was the best practice. I led with what I thought were the words that needed to be said to motivate people to do. And I also thought I was being a good coach in some ways. And even towards the end, as the ship was sinking, I thought I could pivot and begin to talk about being a servant leader, which is important to me still, but it was too little too late. And now what I'm finding is I'm now sitting at the helm of a very quickly growing technology startup. We are hiring people faster than I can remember their names at this point. But I'm learning that that leading with my heart first and with my head second is massively more fulfilling for me as a leader and as a husband and a father too, because there's some balance in there, but it's also much more effective. And so when I hear, Fateme, what you're saying, for me, it comes down to my response, therefore, is in two words. The first is compassion. And I would define that by saying I use my heart to try and look at another person's heart before I use my eyes to look at them. And let that tell me and let that inform me in that moment. And the second one is grace, where I have a lot of fun bringing grace into conversations because a lot of times as the boss, you walk in the room, people don't expect you to give them something they don't deserve. And that's how I define grace, is when you give someone something they don't deserve. So rather than, wag your finger and say, hey, awful job, you take a completely different approach. And when you combine the two, compassion and grace, as a leader in any environment, whether it's in an art studio or in a Fortune 50 company, I think you're going to hit a ringer every time, because it also keeps you in a place where you as a leader remain humble and teachable. Accountability is easier. So that's my response. I appreciate it. Thank you. So just wanted to share.
Thank you for saying this, especially for mentioning compassion. I so love what you just said. Thank you for that. And I actually cannot think of any form of leadership without compassion. How are we going to serve our customers if we don't have compassion towards them? We cannot even understand what is their problem. If I cannot relate to someone problem, how can I claim to solve it? And I think there is no leadership without it. It's simple, not possible. It is not possible. It's just like, no. So thank you for saying that.
Hey, Curtis, go ahead.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this, and I'm not disappointed at all. I mean, when Mark and I first talked about it, it was interesting because I'm trying my hand at a little bit of poetry myself, and the way I look at poetry is when we talk about leadership, communications is such a key part of leadership. And to me, the amazing thing about poetry is to be able to clearly get ideas across in a very short, succinct way, but in a way that people remember as well. And everything that Sam said about making not just a logical connection, but an emotional connection when you're doing that message, just is so critical. So yeah, I love poetry, or even short stories, just the ways of using words effectively. I'm kind of rereading some Hemingway now. And if you know Hemingway at all, he has kind of the iceberg theory, which is minimal amount of words that just gives you the tip of the iceberg, and then you fill out all the rest underneath it. So yeah, I think this is exactly on target, especially today's world, because Mark, as a communication professional, I mean, everyone's just deluged with so much information in so many different ways. But when you hear it through poetry or music or some other form, there's a much better chance that your message will stick. So thank you so much for the topic and sharing your experience.
Wow. Well, I was prepared for the worst. I don't have to convince. So it's like, this is actually very, very touching. And I'm glad you actually mentioned poetry and music. They share the rhythm. And I think rhythm is so important in everyday life. there is a rhythm in our heart, and if that goes out of sync, we are not feeling very well. So rhythm is important for us to be alive, and there is a rhythm to business. And this idea, and there is a rhythm to leadership as well. This idea that a business always has to grow. And what is growth at the end of the day? That doesn't exist in nature, but does exist in art forms. The rhythm is part of art. And if you try to do this experiment, is something I want to mention because it makes a lot of sense on what you just said. So sometimes when I facilitate workshops and I ask people to write poems, especially when I'm in international settings, people would ask me, but I'm not sure I can write in English. Can I write in my mother tongue? And I say, sure, go ahead. And then when I ask them to read out loud, they will say, but I cannot read it, it's not in English. And I say, go ahead, read it. And it never fails. Everybody, they don't understand the words, of course, because they don't know those words, but they get the feeling. How do they get that? Through a rhythm that resonates directly with their heart. So true, with music is much easier because we hear the rhythm of the notes, and that's kind of universal, but also with poetry. So try if you have international friends, and you will be amazed. There is an understanding that, of course, is not cognitive. It's a resonance with the heart that makes us understand what are the intentions of that person. What is the essence? And this is what poetry is to me, the essence, what's true, what is at the core, what is at the heart of something. And people will get exactly what is at the essence of the message, of your message.
Hey, Joe. Isla White.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Fateme. How are you? Beautiful words. So some of the people that I work with, and I don't want to put people in too simple a bucket, but let's just say young men, quite predominantly. I think that they would deep down intrinsically agree with quite a lot of what you're saying, as do I. But it requires a level of vulnerability, I think, that can be challenging for people. Do you have any thoughts on how we can help lead people into this kind of space, if it's something that they might be naturally, for whatever reason, quite resistant to?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe. Those are some of the challenges I also meet. And I don't want to put people in boxes either, but it's true. Younger generations are more sensitive or more open to this, so they won't push back. I've also learned that actually I cannot sell the work I do in the traditional way, and that's one of the reasons why I called my business ReNEW Business, because I had to flip everything. So I actually don't think, because a lot in business, and sometimes when we approach to leaders, is about show me the return of investment, show me that is going to work, and then I'll be convinced that I can do this. And actually it doesn't work in that way, to be honest, especially well, actually for nothing, because I don't even believe if any of the major consulting company will selling something that is the same, always the same, is actually working, because context matter, environment matters. But, it's more reassuring to certain type of people. It's more reassuring because I have a step and I know what I'm going to get out of it. The thing is that we can never deliver learning. The learning is mine, is yours. So learning can never, ever, ever be delivered. We can only create the condition for learning. So what I have learned to do is not to sell anything to anyone. But I know that at a certain point, maybe by me sharing, by me being unapologetic about what I do, by me not, leading with the science, which I'll bring at a certain point if I'm working with someone. I'll validate what they are feeling and what they are seeing through science. But by me not leading with that, I'll actually start talking to their heart. Are they going to respond, all of them? No. All at the same time? No. But when they are ready to listen to that, they will. So typically people don't hire me if they don't believe it. Because it flies, it goes like, whoop, it doesn't. But at a certain point, if they get curious, maybe they read one poem, or maybe they'll see a painting and say, oh, this spoke to me. And they want to know from me why that spoke to them. But they actually, I don't know, they know why. And sometimes it has also happened to me that I had a leader who really believed in that, and their team not, and they hired me. So I had to do a lot of shifting between the hard and the soft, So provoke an emotion. Or what I actually say is evoking their heart back, their artist within, because I believe that there is an artist, there is a poet in each and every one of us. There is one, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do the work I do. So it's trying to evoke that and notice, pay attention. So use the artist's skill to notice when they are becoming uncomfortable and give a little bit of ground where they can stand. So say, look, this is actually what is happening in your brain, or this is what the science tells. But you'll never hear me leading from that, never. I don't know if I answered to your question. It's not actually linear.
No, and I think what you're talking about there is the both, right? There's the mix of the art and the science. And then I think also what you said about creating the space for the learning to take place. I think that's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome, Joe.
Sam.
Yeah, Joe, I wanted to pitch in on your question too, mate. It's a good one. A bunch of young men running around, they want to headbutt before they want to cry together, I get it. I used to be that way. But Curtis and I have talked a lot about vulnerability in our travels. Just, you spend a lot of time on a plane or on a bus or in Africa with someone, you get into deeper conversations. But you guys, I firmly believe that vulnerability is a catalyst for a relationship. Mm-hmm. Vulnerability is a catalyst for a relationship. So you have to first start with an environment where there's a genuine desire for a relationship. Mm-hmm. If there's no desire for a relationship, vulnerability is a waste of time. For me, that's the first ingredient. And we're building a culture at our company right now. We spend a lot of time working on that. So Fateme, I really appreciate that you're into building culture, because everyone says it eats strategy for lunch, but no one does the hard work to build culture. They just go to strategy. Culture is really hard to do. So for us, we've developed a culture where there is just an understanding. As you walk in the front door, we're filtering for heart. So we filter for people who we know want to walk in the door and become an employee at our company, who are here to build relationships and to generate relational equity with one another, right? And then what we do is we promote moments and opportunity for vulnerability in smaller groups through accountability, right? And so when there's an opportunity for me to hold Mark accountable, and it's in a small group, and both Mark and I'm picking on Mark Ross here. I don't know if there's another Mark on the call, but if Mark and I are desirous of a stronger relationship together, and we're in a position where one has to hold the other accountable and vice versa, then when Mark misses his milestone or I do, then I have an opportunity, maybe slight though that it may be, to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I missed that. I was having a bad week. A friend of mine died of cancer. Now, Mark, if he's a human, and what Fateme also said, and I wonder about that sometimes, but what Fateme also said about a lot of our rational emotion is first driven by emotional reaction. If Mark is reacting like a human would, he has a moment where he can open his mouth and say, yeah, I had a friend die of cancer last year. Bam, vulnerability just catalyzed a relationship. and off to the next one, you know? So Joe, I've seen that work in a small group setting out of the professional world very well. I've seen that begin to work with our own employees in small group sessions that I, as the boss, say, okay, you, and you, I want you, the three of you, to meet together once a week, right? And then we also have accountability partners. My business partner calls it accountability buddy. You know, he kind of makes a joke of it. And it is kind of funny, but it's also moments where the person in our company right now who's maybe one of the lowest on the totem pole, she's holding the CEO accountable, right? So there's also moments there where transparency helps flatten the network or flatten the team. So you're getting out of this pyramid shape, this hierarchical top down, because that also fights vulnerability, you know? This sense of I can't speak to the boss because I'm 2 steps away from him or her, you know? So just some thoughts here, Joe. I don't know if any of it's useful, but I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. So I wanted to share.
Hey, Fateme, there's 2 things, Joe, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say thank you. There's a lot of food for thought there, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Fateme, too, I love, like, you do actually lead a workshop called Messy Art, which I'm desperate to take, but I think I'm putting words in your mouth, but that word seems very intentional to me in terms of the messy, because to me that's very liberating, because art, like the culture of art, you know, it can be very snobby and very ridiculous, and it's highbrow, and you go to a museum and you can't touch anything and be quiet. And I love that word messy, because that it just basically says, you know, to me, it's just a very liberating, open word. Can you talk about the word messy?
Well, you know, it took a lot of time for me to understand why I'd called that messy art. I mean, it takes me a while to understand things. But to me, life is messy. Learning is messy. And when we go for complexity is messy. So actually, we can have, I don't know how many people, we are like 13, 14 people on this call. If we go around and we ask, what is messy to you? We will all give a different definition of messy. And that, to me, only tells what is our relationship with control. So the definition we attach to messiness is actually a way of saying what is our relationship to messy. And that's... So one of the reasons why I called, and that was my own practice and still is my own practice before it became, something done with other people and a gathering and a space for others to practice art without, having a master in art, or without having to perform to a certain level so that actually we can hang that painting or whatever, that picture in a museum or somewhere. It started out of just me following my desire. My hands really wanted to paint. And I kept telling myself, but I need a studio to paint. And then one morning I said, okay, you know what? Forget about it. I'll just going to buy primary colors, tempera primary colors, and I'll use my finger. So I'll just get messy. I don't care. So I give myself the complete freedom to make like something no one would have even called art, but I just wanted to do it. And I think I've painted more than 300 paintings. Up until now. So it has changed my relationship with the word messy. Actually, I don't need that. If I see myself organizing colors and brushes and things, I'm like, no, lady. Art is about expression, not about impressing anyone or about performing. So this is the space to play. And I've seen, the people who come to these practices, they've also, I did not notice that at the beginning, but it is a pattern, so that expressing ourselves beyond words. Sometimes we are tired of words, and I actually think that words are even tired of us. This is like, oh, this dumb human. It's like, and I wasn't. It's not exactly I begin to exist as a word. Why are they using it in this sense? So it liberates, and because we are expressing the feelings, so they come out, and only later we can put a word. So there is a kind of freedom, and there is a kind of vulnerability that it can come up and can show on a page, and then the knowledge of it. And another point I make during those practices that there is no one teaching anything to anyone. So actually don't ever teach a technique, because it is not about a technique. It's about connecting with the art, connecting with the emotion, connecting with the intuition, with the imagination. And for that, no one has a recipe. So I don't believe that there is someone that can teach someone else to do that. So yeah, it's another way of expressing our humanity. That's all it's about, I think.
That was delicious. That's such a great word, messy. Hey, Brendan.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about that word a lot. When I lived in Ireland, I met this priest, as you often do in Ireland, drinking in bars. And one thing he said to me, and it was just something he said in passing, but it's stuck with me for a long time. And he said, there's a sacred messiness to life sometimes.
I agree.
And so sometimes when you think that within the messiness, there is a pattern, there is something to decode, and that when you embrace that not everything is going to be linear, not everything is going to be in order, you can pull something out of it. And that's radical vision sometimes, even in science and mathematics and business. To be radical sometimes means you're stepping out of linear order, and that's messy. So
love it. Love it.
Sacred messiness. That's what I say.
Fateme, well, before we go, then we have another question, because we're coming up on 45 after, and it's almost 8 p.m. in beautiful Lisbon. So I want to thank everybody for getting on this call. This is a lot of fun. Fateme, thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
I'm going to, obviously, if you want to reach out to Fateme, I'm going to share with her email address. She's very prolific on Twitter and on the Instagram. She's also been kind enough to make one of her books available. If you want to purchase it, she'll autograph it, and she'll actually do a piece of original art. So we're going to throw that there. If you want some of her original art, she'll slap something together and mail it across the Atlantic Ocean. And this was great. Hopefully I will see you soon, Fateme, in some part of Europe or somewhere in the world.
On the web.
Yeah, hopefully, probably more likely on the web, but hopefully we will see each other soon somewhere.
In Puglia.
Puglia. I think that sounds like a good plan. Road trip to Puglia. Thanks everybody for getting on this call. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks again. See you soon.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks.
Hold on. That was great.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
That was perfect.